Maresca versus Arteta. The battle of Pep's disciples drew 1-1 at Stamford Bridge. And in today's episode, I'll be breaking down how Arsenal nullified Chelsea's high press, Odegaard's offensive and defensive brilliance, and how Arsenal restricted Chelsea's 3-2-2-3 system in build-up due to a vital mid-game change. And I love when an analysis comes true. Check this clip from a previous episode on Maresca's high line from defensive crosses against Liverpool. And Curtis Jones doesn't even have to time this perfectly, because as the ball is played, you can see he would have been onside even with the defensive line that is set in place on the edge of the box. And that gives him and any player that's in the situation the freedom of the box to take a touch, which shouldn't usually happen from a cross from this deep. I explored how Maresca's high line from deep crosses was exposed by Curtis Jones, and it was exposed again by Arsenal and Martinelli in the game at Stamford Bridge. But firstly, let's jump into how Arsenal nullified Chelsea's high press. Maresca's Chelsea love to press high, disrupt the opposition build-up as early as possible, and win the ball high up the pitch to create transition moments closer to goal. But Arsenal's setup on the ball had 4 clear aims, and they were to overload the central area and the first line of the press, to disconnect the Chelsea wingers from the press, exploit the wide areas with combinations, and expose Chelsea's high line that sets up on the edge of the box for crosses and through balls. And if we look at the average positions for Arsenal against Chelsea, you will see that they usually had a back three, and that could be either Rice or Thomas Partey dropping in, and it was mostly Thomas Partey dropping into the middle of the back three. Then you had the fullbacks who are usually deeper but still staying wide, fairly close to Gabriel and Saliba. You also had the wingers staying high and wide, or they pushed in centrally closer to Halves with the fullbacks pushing out high and wide. And that's why you can see both Saka, Martinelli, number 7 and 11, and number 12, Timber, and Ben White, number 4, in those wide channels for the average positions in the game. And then you had Havertz dropping into that false 9 position in between Caicedo and Lavia, causing all sorts of problems, but also staying high on occasion to receive long balls directly from Raya. And the aim of this was twofold. One was to prevent Palmer and Jackson being able to press Saliba and Gabriel directly by dropping Thomas Partey right in the middle of them. And the second was to disconnect the Chelsea wingers from that front 2 press. Arsenal usually had 3 players in the back line, and it was usually one of either Rice or Partey dropping in, and one just ahead of them as well. And you can see Gabriel is in the middle of the centre-back 3 at the moment, with Rice putting out wide to the left centre-back role, and Partey just behind Palmer and Caicedo, which means that if either of them were to press, that he would try and find a little pocket in between them, or just kind of float behind their screen to try and find a pass from either of the centre-backs. And you can see the double axis of Caicedo and Lavia, with Caicedo usually man-marking Rice and Lavia pushing up to Partey when he could. And you can see Martinelli out wide pinning the fullback in Gusto, and Timber drifting into that number 8 position, drawing Madueke away from the press. But look what Arsenal's setup has done to Chelsea's press. It's very disconnected. There's large gaps in and around the front line and the midfield line. And although it seemed that Chelsea had boxed Arsenal in, this is what Arsenal wanted, because they created that separation between the front line and the midfield line. It meant that Thomas Partey could drift behind the screen and create a nice pocket of space for him to receive the ball. And as the match developed, Chelsea didn't really press high as much and kind of settled into a mid-block, waiting for Arsenal to play through them and then catch them in the midfield zone. And if we look at the possession loss in the defensive half from Arsenal, they only lost the ball 16 times compared to Chelsea's 35. And we'll come on to Arsenal's press and why they were so successful later on. And another way that Arsenal tried to penetrate Chelsea's press was through wide combinations. And the return of Martin Odegaard meant the return of their right side bias. In this game against Chelsea, they tried to attack down the right-hand side 46% of the time and rarely attacked down the middle. And this created beautiful combination play with White overlapping, Odegaard drifting into the half space, or isolating Saka 1v1 for in-swinging crosses into the box. And jumping into the visuals again, you can see that Arsenal set up with that back 3, and this time it's White, Saliba and Gabriel in that more conventional back 3, and Odegaard drifts out wide in behind Neto, especially as Neto goes to press Ben White. And pay attention to Thomas Partey here, who's just behind the front 2 press and who does brilliantly again to drift behind them and create a pocket of space for him to receive. As Neto goes to press Ben White, Lavia goes to press Thomas Partey, but then realises Odegaard is also free. Ben White passes it out wide to Odegaard, and Thomas Partey makes another blindside run in behind Lavia, which creates a nice pocket of space for Odegaard to find him in. Ben White starts his overlapping run, and as Partey passes that ball to Saka, Havertz stretches the back line, which forces them away from Saka at this point, and Odegaard's there as backup if needed. And as Saka receives the ball, White continues that overlapping run, but you see the options here and the kind of connections they create. It forces Chelsea onto that side with Odegaard, Partey drifting from that middle spot, and Saka with White overlapping. And when they got into these great positions in the wide channels, they attempted to expose Chelsea's high line on the edge of the box from crosses. And it did so multiple times from in-swinging crosses from Odegaard and Saka, and specifically Odegaard for the goal. Odegaard picks up a great half space just in front of the back line, and this is where the issue comes with the high line that Chelsea employ. They all try and set that line on the edge of the box, but the defender's natural movement is always to drop. And that's what Colwill does in this instance, and he plays Saka, Rice and Martinelli all on side. And Martinelli is able to take a touch, compose himself and finish in the box, which Curtis Jones was able to do in the game against Liverpool from Chelsea as well. And there's analysis on that. I'll add a card somewhere up here. Check that out when you get a bit of time. But this goal here was symptomatic of a problem that we've seen from Chelsea all season, with this high line on the edge of the box, and Arsenal exploited it multiple times in this game, especially from that right wing and in-swinging crosses. And a lot of Arsenal players play fantastically in this game, especially Gabriel and Saliba, but there's two in particular who I've mentioned numerous times so far in Thomas Partey and Martin Odegaard. You can see that Partey had 3 shot-creating actions and 6 progressive passes, second for Arsenal in their metrics, and 8 passes into the final third, which is first out of all Arsenal players. And Martin Odegaard had 5 shot-creating actions, 4 key passes, and 10 progressive passes, all number 1 in Arsenal's metrics, showing what they've been missing over the past few games. And Odegaard wasn't only instrumental on the ball, off the ball, especially when you watch the game live. You can see his leadership and the coordination of the press, and him triggering the press himself was key for Arsenal throughout the game. However, that was only after Arsenal made a key adjustment midway through the first half that would gradually restrict Chelsea's build-up as the game progressed. Chelsea aimed to do one of 3 things on the ball in their patterns of play, and that is to play directly to Gusto or Palmer in that number 10 position, to find Caicedo, Lavia or Jackson in that central area, or to play directly out to the wingers to attack 1v1. Chelsea line up in this 3-2-2 setup when they're deep in their own half, with the centre-backs recycling the ball, attempting to find either one of the options previously mentioned. And you can see what Arsenal are trying to do here is they had Rice and Partey man-marking Gusto and Palmer, and they let Kai Havertz and Odegaard press the centre-backs whilst trying to screen the ball into Caicedo and Lavia, and then the likes of Martinelli and Saka would press the outside centre-backs and prevent them playing directly to either Neto or Madueke in the game. You can see that as Cucurella passes the ball to Colwill, Arsenal had all the zones fairly well covered, but one more pass over to Fofana meant that Odegaard was out of place and the ball directly to Lavia was continuously open. And because Rice and Partey were man-marking Gusto and Palmer, they weren't in the position to press either Caicedo or Lavia once they received the ball, which meant that either of them could progress the ball up the pitch fairly comfortably behind Arsenal's press. But Arsenal made a vital adjustment midway through the first half, and you saw it predominantly from goal kick situations, but it also happened in open play. And you can see from the visuals that Odegaard has dropped slightly deeper and Rice has pushed up slightly higher, and it had this sort of 4-1 shape from the goal kick situation. Havertz is ready to press Sanchez as he receives the ball from Colwill, and as Sanchez passes it back to Colwill, Havertz cuts off half the pitch and presses Colwill on the ball. And as Havertz cuts off half the pitch, Rice can become more aggressive in pressing Caicedo, and as can Odegaard in pressing Lavia. Saka stays narrow to prevent a pass directly into Palmer in behind him, but he's also ready to press Cucurella if the ball is passed out wide. And because Havertz has cut off half the pitch, you can see that Martinelli is able to sit a bit narrower and pick up Gusto, who's the free man that Rice has left. in case there's a direct ball onto him as well. But as you can see from the visual, they've cut off all the options very well. Partey is tight on Palmer, and Saka is ready to sort of intercept a Palmer if needed, but ready to press Cucurella if that pass goes out wide. And Halves is now cut off half the pitch and presses Colwill into a mistake. He passes the ball directly into Saka, and they're able to transition from that moment. And what Odegaard did great in the game, which you saw live, but maybe it's hard to see from these stills, is he's pausing. He's pausing and holding off and covering off that central pass into Jackson, maybe enticing that pass into Lavia, and then pressing as and when it got there. And that leadership and intelligence in screen off passes and coordinating the press was what helped Arsenal in the match as the match progressed. And I'm surprised that Chelsea didn't do something like this when Arsenal had the ball. They could have had Jackson cutting off half the pitch and Palmer slightly deeper, and that would have prevented that tricky scenario where Partey would drift off the screener from the front two and receive in a nice pocket of space that Lavia or Caicedo weren't close enough to get to. Now, this isn't a plug for my channel. This really was a game of two halves. If you look at the XG created for both teams in the first half versus the second half, Chelsea dominating the first half and Arsenal the second half. And that matches the analysis from this video. Arsenal were able to gain more control once they changed away from that high 4-4-2 press, and that limited Chelsea's XG creation. And Arsenal were able to gain more control of the ball with Partey dropping in between the centre-backs, as well as the wide combinations causing havoc for Chelsea. This was a positive step for Arsenal. They controlled a decent amount of that game against a tough Chelsea team, and it's no coincidence that it came with the return of Martin Odegaard. Arsenal's expected goals has dropped from this season compared to last season. Last season, they had expected goals of 2 per game, and this season it's closer to 1.55, which is a big drop. They're at mid-table around 8th in the league for expected goals. But this game showed they had found their fluency again. The wide combinations are back. They have some injury problems, but if they can get that first 11 fit again, they should be back in that title race come the end of the season. Chelsea fans, if you feel neglected so far, make sure to check out my analysis on Maresca's Chelsea versus Liverpool from earlier on this season. Check out some of my earlier videos as well, hopefully pointing out either side of my head. Like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and I'll see you on the next episode of A Game with Two Halves.